I want to ask you something. When you were little, when you were maybe 3 or 4 or even 5 years old, do you remember what it was like to open a new toy? That moment where you would tear the wrapping off, that feeling that you had with that pure and simple feeling that was completely yours, just you and your new toy. And in that moment, nobody was watching you. Nobody was judging you. Nobody needed you to do it again with better lighting. It was just your moment with a new toy. Now I want you to imagine something else. What if every single time you opened a present, there were cameras pointed at your face? There were producers in the room. There were sponsors who had paid you money to be there. There were 40 million strangers on the other side of a screen watching to see if you looked excited enough while opening that present. And what if on top of that, your parents' jobs, your family's house, your family's bills, everything depended on whether you performed that job correctly, whether you showed enough of enthusiasm and excitement in the correct way. What do you think would happen to that feeling of pure and just simple joy? And we're not just talking about a toy here, but to you. What would happen to you? His name is Ryan Kaji. You probably know him as Ryan's World or Ryan's Toy Review if you have been around long enough. He is the most watched child in the YouTube history. He started filming when he was 3 years old. He made over $200 million before he even learned how to read a chapter book. Could you imagine that? And somewhere in the middle of all of that, that little boy who just loved opening toys disappeared. So, hi, hello, I'm Michelle McGowan, and this is Emotional Wealth. And today we are going somewhere that most people are not willing to go, because this is not a story about YouTube money or viral fame. This is a story about what happens to a child, what happens to their heart, to their sense of who they are when their entire childhood gets turned into a business before they ever even had a chance to figure out who they were. And it is a story about something that is happening inside of millions of homes right now that nobody has the words for yet. But by the end of this video, you will have the words, you will have the language, and you will have the knowledge. So let me take you back to where this all started, because most of you have seen these videos, or at least have been near them. Even if you never intentionally searched for them, they've probably popped up, or you've gone in Walmart and you've seen them. These videos were the background noise for an entire generation of little kids. They were what your niece watched on repeat, what your neighbor's 4-year-old asked for by name, what played out in the back seat on long car rides. The early videos are actually kind of beautiful in their simplicity. So I want to take you back, all the way back to 2015, where Ryan was 3 years old. His mother, Loanne, is holding the camera, right? Ryan is in his pajamas, his hair sticking up in about 4 different directions. He's trying to open a Lego train set, and he cannot quite figure out which side of the box to start with. And he is completely, in that moment, he is completely, absolutely 100% beside himself with excitement. And this right there, that right there is the whole entire video. There was no editing. There was no script. There was no brand deal. There was no production meeting about how to maximize engagement with target demographic. There was just a little boy, a 3-year-old little boy, and a toy in real pure joy. And people, they could not get enough of it. And that's because there was something about watching a child feel pure, unplanned, nobody is grading, just delight. That type of joy, and something about that, it just connected to something deep inside of adults watching. Maybe it was nostalgia, or remembering what it felt like to be little and that easily happy. Maybe it was just something clean, something honest, something fun in a world that had gotten very complicated and very loud. Maybe it was just a simple moment. But whatever it was, millions of people, they clicked. And then tens of millions of people clicked. And then it was not just Lego train sets anymore. It was brand deals and a production company and toys at Walmart with Ryan's face on them. and an animated TV show, and a feature film, and a business empire, a real hundreds of millions of dollars business empire that was built entirely around the face and voice and childhood of a little boy who started out just loving to open boxes. And here's the thing that I need you to hold on to before we go any further in this video. None of that happened to Ryan, but all of it did happen through Ryan. And that difference, that one word from to to through, is the most important thing I'm going to say in this section of the video. Because when something happens to you, you are a person in the middle of an experience. You have feelings about it. You have say over it. You can step back from it when you need to. But when something happens through you, you are not the person. You are the channel. You are the vessel. You are the thing the experience moves through on its way to somewhere else. And Ryan, he was 3 years old the first time the world started moving through him. And then by the time he was 6, his channel was putting out content every single day. His parents had both quit their jobs to run the business full time. They created Sunlight Entertainment, which was the production company that they had built around Ryan. And that production company, it had an entire staff of people. There were scripts, there were shot lists, there were brand deals, and there was a posting schedule that a fully grown adult would find exhausting. And at the center of all of it was just a kid in first grade being filmed every single day in his home, in his bedroom, in the places that are supposed to belong to just him, that are supposed to just be childlike. And his parents, they kept telling the cameras, they kept telling the world that this was just fun family time, that Ryan loved every single second of it, that it was just natural, that it was organic, that it is exactly what he would have been doing anyways, no matter what. And I need you to stick with that, because that statement is doing a lot of psychological work underneath the surface. And we will be coming back to that. So here's what started happening around 2019, 2020, and 2021. Ryan got older, which, you know, that sounds pretty obvious, because that is what children do. Children, they grow. That is literally the whole point of childhood. But growing up created a problem for the Ryan World's machine, because the machine had been built around something very specific, which is a tiny, wide-eyed, absolutely losing his mind over a toy toddler. That right there, that was the product. That is what 40 million people had subscribed to see. And that child was becoming a teenager. He was growing up. And people started to notice something was off during that time. Longtime subscribers, people who had been watching since the Lego Train video, they started leaving comments on his videos. And I don't mean mean comments, more like worried ones, confused ones. Comments that said things like, he looks tired. He does not seem like he's having fun. That something is different, that I cannot put a finger on it, but something is wrong. And if you go back and you watch the videos side by side from early Ryan and later Ryan, you see it. You see the difference. Early Ryan, he moves like a child. He is impulsive. He gets distracted by something off camera mid-sentence and just follows that distraction because he does not care about the sentence anymore. He's a child. In those early videos, he would trip over words. He would laugh at things that were not even funny. His whole body was involved in whatever he was feeling in those moments all of the time without any filter. And then if you watch the later videos and the boy you see on screen is hitting the marks, he is saying the lines, he is smiling exactly at the right moment. He's reacting with exactly the right amount of enthusiasm, not too much and not too little. And he is doing it in the same way, take after take after take, video after video after video. From the outside, that can look like he's just got better at this. But here's what I see when I watch those videos through a clinical lens. What I see is a child who learned to hide. I see a child who learned not from anyone sitting him down and telling him, but just from living inside that type of environment, that his real feelings were not safe to be shown on camera. And that's not because anyone was cruel, and that's not because anything was violence or obvious, but it's because the environment had a very clear message underneath all of it. And that message was, when you perform the way we need you to perform, then everything is okay. And when you don't, then something is at risk here. And a child's nervous system, or the part of their brain and their body that is always reading the room, that's always scanning for safety, it picks up that message immediately. Even when nobody says that out loud. Even when everyone in the room genuinely believes that they are just having some family fun. The child's nervous system, it knows and it adapts. And I want to stop here and talk about something that sounds really simple, but it might be one of the most important things that I say in this entire video. I want to talk about what play is actually for. We even actually have this thing called play therapy in therapy because play is so important. So I do want to talk about what play is actually for, because most of us were taught, without anyone ever really saying it directly, that play is what children do when there is really nothing more important happening. It's like the break between the real stuff and the recess, or it's just a filler. But in childhood development and psychology, that is not what play is at all. Play is how children build their brains. So I want to say that again, because I really want it to land on how important play is. Play is how children build their brains. Because when a child is able to pick up a toy, and when they're able to make a story about that toy, they're not just killing time. This is not just a filler of time. They are learning how to think creatively, how to imagine things that do not exist yet. They are practicing how to handle frustration when the block tower falls down for the 5th time in a row. They are figuring out what they like and what they do not like when they are at play. They're figuring out what makes them feel powerful, what makes them feel scared, what bores them, what lights them up. Play is how a child starts to find out who they actually are. And here's a word that makes all of that work, that makes this brain development work. The word is intrinsic. Intrinsic means coming from inside, from your own genuine desire, from real curiosity that belongs to you. Play only builds a child's brain the way it is supposed to when it is intrinsic, when it comes from a real want inside of the child, not from outside pressure, not from a reward, not from someone else needing them to do it. And here's where the science gets really interesting. There's research, real documented research on what happens when you start paying a child to do something that they already love. And it's called over-justification effect. And what it found is this. When you reward a child for something they already enjoy for its own sake, when you attach an external incentive to it, their natural love for that thing actually goes down. The reward does not add to the joy. It replaces the joy because the child brain shifts and it stops asking, do I want to do this? And instead it starts asking, what do I get for doing this? And once that shift happens, the internal spark, the thing that made it fun in the first place, it just starts to go out. And I want you to hold on to that idea, because Ryan was literally paid to play with toys. And I don't mean that as a figure of speech. His family's entire income, their home, their lifestyle, their careers, their entire professional identity was generated by footage of him playing with toys. And I want you to really sit with that, what that does to a 3-year-old, because the joy in those early videos, they were real. And I want to be clear about that. Ryan genuinely loved those toys. He genuinely loved opening things and exploring things and building things. But the moment that real joy became the product, the moment his actual delight became what other people were selling, something started to happen underneath the surface that no camera could catch, which is the fact that play stopped being play and play became work. And Ryan never got to just play again. So who is Ryan Kaji underneath the brand? That is genuinely a hard question to answer. And I think how hard it is to even answer this question really tells us everything. Because here's what we know about what is supposed to happen during the teenage years of a child's life. which is the fact that between roughly 12 and 18 years old, the main psychological job of a young person is something a psychologist named Eric Erikson called identity formation. And what that means in plain language is that teenagers are supposed to try things. They're supposed to fail at things. They're supposed to be really into something for 6 months and then completely lose interest. They're supposed to make embarrassing choices. They're supposed to change their mind. They're supposed to surprise themselves. They're supposed to fall on their face in private. They're supposed to figure it out slowly, messily, imperfectly, who they actually are. And the mess, figuring it out in a messy way, is not an accident. And really, the mess is the point. That messy, unpredictable, nobody's watching, figuring it out phase is where identity actually gets built, where a person finds out what matters to them, what they believe, who they want to be. And Ryan, he did not get that. Instead, what Ryan got was a brand that was decided for him at age 3, that was written down before he could write his own name, that was turned into a business before he even started kindergarten. And that brand was Ryan Kaji. It was cheerful. It was enthusiastic. It was always excited. It was always happy to open one more toy. And that brand, it was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It had 40 million subscribers. It had licensing deals with Walmart. It had a production staff. And it needed Ryan to keep being exactly who he had always been. Even as his actual brain, the real brain inside of his real skull, was growing up. And in psychology, what happened to Ryan has a name, and it's called identity foreclosure. And as you know, foreclosure itself, it means closed off. It means locked. Like when a bank forecloses on a house, the door gets shut and nobody gets in or out of it. So identity foreclosure is when a person gets locked into an identity before they ever had a chance to explore who they might be. And when the identity is not something they built through their own experience, when it is something that was assigned to them, they get locked into it. And then the door, it just gets shut. And it is not an identity that Ryan chose. It is an identity that was built around him before he was even old enough to have an opinion about it. And here's the part that sits the heaviest with me. Ryan was not just living inside of this brand. What he was doing is he was holding this entire brand up. I mean, just take a look at his life. His parents, they quit their job to run it. The production company ran on his name. The homes in Texas and Hawaii were paid for by his face on camera. A full staff of people had jobs because of him. And as a child, he understood this because children, they always understand more than adults think they do. And in family therapy, when a child becomes a person who is financially or emotionally holding the family together, and when the family's stability rests on the child's performance, we call that parentification. And parentification is when the child and the parents, they trade places. It's when the child becomes the one who is responsible for holding everything up. It's when the child's job stops being to grow and explore and to make mistakes safely and starts being to make sure the adults around them are okay. That is parentification. And here's what makes parentification so hard to see from the outside, because nobody has to say it out loud. Nobody has to sit a child down and explain the stakes of the situation to them. What happens is the child's nervous system, it just figures it out on its own. And it does this with also a child intellect. So it reads the room, it tracks what makes the adults relax and what makes them tense. The child's nervous system learns the rules, even the unspoken ones, and they learn it so fast. And the rule that Ryan's nervous system learned was when you perform, everything is okay. And when you resist, then something in this dynamic, it gets threatened. So what did he do? He did what any child could or would do. He performed, and he performed, and he performed, and then he performed again. And he kept performing until the performance was the only version of himself that he knew how to show. So now let me tell you about Loan and Shion Kaji. because I think they are more complicated than either their fans or their critics want to admit. The people who defend them flatten them into these loving, well-meaning parents who just got caught up in all of this excitement and this exciting opportunity. And the people who come after them flatten them into these villains who knowingly exploited their child for money. And I think the truth is harder and more human than either of those versions. So Loanne Kaji was born in Vietnam. She came to the United States as a refugee. She built a life here. She became a chemistry teacher. Shion Kaji is a structural engineer. And these are not impulsive people. These are not people who made careless decisions in life. These are people who came from places where the ground that they walked on was not guaranteed to hold, where financial security was not something that you could take for granted, where things could be taken away, where starting over was not hypothetical. It was a lived memory. And I want you to just take a step back and I want you to think what happens inside of a nervous system that has been shaped by that kind of history, by scarcity, by displacement, by knowing at a cellular level what it feels like when everything just disappears. And then when safety finally does come, it does not always feel like safety. It feels like something fragile to these type of people, like something that has to be protected constantly, like something that could be taken again. And the response to that feeling, the only response that many nervous systems know to that feeling, is to grip even tighter, to control more, and to make sure that the thing is working, keeps on working. Because losing it again to them with that type of nervous system, it's just unthinkable. So when Ryan's early videos started going viral, when the money started coming in faster than any chemistry teacher's salary or engineering salary ever have, I want you to think about what that activated in two people whose history had taught them that security is temporary. What happened was that they built a structure. They built a schedule. They built a company and they kept the content coming because stopping felt like risking everything to them. And they told themselves, and they probably genuinely believed it, that Ryan, he loved every minute of it, that he was just thriving, that it was good for him. Because even thinking or considering the alternate, the ideal that the thing that they had built might be hurting the child that they love, that would be too big and too painful to even look at directly. So they sold themselves on a story. And because of this, now I have to name something that I cannot leave out, which is that in 2019, a consumer watchdog group filed a formal complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC is the government's agency that regulates advertising and it protects consumers from misleading marketing. So during this time, the complaint alleged that more than 90% of Ryan's World's videos contained paid product placements, meaning that companies were paying for Ryan to show and talk about their toys, and that these payments were never disclosed to the audience of preschoolers, to the audience of children who developmentally could not tell the difference between a friend sharing something that they love and a corporation paying someone to sell it to them. And that right there, that's not a small thing. That's using a child's authentic relationship with millions of children, the trust that those little kids had in Ryan as their friend, and turning it into a sales tool without anyone's acknowledge or consent. And I want you to hold on to that detail, not to call Loanne or Shion monsters, but I want you to hold on to it because it really does tell us something important. It tells us, or at least it tells me, that they were running a blueprint. And a blueprint that said, protect the thing that is working, grow the thing that is working, and manage whatever might threaten the thing that is working. That blueprint did not just come out of nowhere. That blueprint that they were operating from, it came from a history. And without ever fully examining it or becoming aware of it, they applied it to their son. So here's the question I have been building towards this entire video. And the question isn't, are Ryan's parents bad people? The question is, what actually happens to a child inside of their mind, inside of their sense of who they are, when the person that they are required to perform is not the person that they actually are. A psychologist named Donald Winnicott spent his career studying this exact thing, and he gave it a name that most people have never even heard of, but I think about it in my work constantly. He called it true self and the false self. And here's what he meant. Every child comes into the world with a real, authentic interior life, with real feelings, with real preferences, with real reactions that come up naturally and spontaneously. And not because someone told them to feel that way, but because that is who they genuinely are. And Donald called that true self. But here's what happens in certain environments. When a child grows up somewhere that their feelings are not welcome, where their real reactions create problems, where being authentically themselves threatens the stability of the family around them, their psyche, it does something very smart in those situations. It builds a different version of them, a version that is safer to show, a version that earns approval and keeps the peace and does not disrupt anything. And Donald called that the false self. And for Ryan, the false self had a name. It had a trademark. It had a YouTube channel, and it had 40 million subscribers. The false self was Ryan Kaji, a cheerful, compliant, always ready to open one more toy, always delivering the right reaction on cue. The child the world had built a business around. And the true self, the actual Ryan, the tired, complex, and quietly uncomfortable teenager who had private thoughts and changing interests and real feelings that did not fit the brand, that Ryan got pushed further and further and further underground. And that's because the false self was making everyone happy. And the true self, it was a risk. And now here's where I want you to understand what happens to a false self over time. And what happens is that it gets better at performing. That part is true. But it gets harder and harder to maintain because underneath the performance, the gap, it just keeps growing. The distance between who you are showing the world and who you actually are, it just keeps getting wider. And at some point, and this is the clinical piece, that gap starts to produce something psychologists call depersonalization. And depersonalization is a word that sounds clinical and complicated, but the experience of it is actually just very simple to describe. So basically, depersonalization is the feeling of watching yourself outside from your body. It's like an out-of-body type of experience, of going through the motions of your own life, of smiling, of talking, of reacting, and of feeling like you are watching someone else do it. Like you are a stranger observing a performance of yourself rather than actually living your own life. And here's the thing about this. Viewers actually noticed this before they had the language to explain what was happening. They called it glazed eye look. They called it the smile that did not reach his eyes anymore. They called it the robotic delivery. They called it the enthusiasm that sounded right, but it just kind of fell flat and empty. And the audience, the viewers, they were not wrong about this because that was not a child who was bad at performing. That was a child whose true self had gone into hiding and whose false self was exhausted from carrying everything alone. And then something happened that made everything crystal clear. When Ryan entered his preteens, when the exhaustion behind his eyes became visible enough that even longtime fans were saying something out loud, the response from Sunlight Entertainment was not to slow down or to maybe even stop. It was to find a replacement, which happened to be Ryan's younger twin sisters, Emma and Kate. And they were introduced to the channels. New spin-offs were launched. New content pipelines were built. The same filming rooms, the same brand partnership structures, the same posting schedule, just different children inside of the machine. And critics called it out and they said what it was, which was an algorithm swap. The product had not changed, only the face of the product had changed. Now I want to be careful here because I'm not telling you this to make Ryan's parents seem like villains. I am telling you what this communicated, not in words, not in any conversation that anyone had, but in the language that family systems always speak, the language of actions and decisions and what actually happens. What is communicated was the machine matters more than the child. And when Ryan got old enough to understand what he was watching, when he was old enough to see his little sisters stepping into the exact role that he had been put in since he was 3 years old, something shifted inside of him because he realized something, or at least as a counselor, I really believe and think he realized something. He realized that the thing his parents had called family time, the thing that they called his gift, his joy, his natural talent, was just a formula. It was a formula that could be picked up and put down. And that formula could be applied to any child who was small enough and young enough to not know what was happening. And there's something that happens in family therapy when a child really understands that their value and the family system was never about who they specifically were, but instead it was about what they could produce for the family. And we call that the wound of disposable asset realization. And it does not arrive loudly. It does not come with a confrontation or a breakdown or some dramatic moment. It just arrives and it hits the child quietly and it sits there. And it rewrites the story a child has been telling themselves about their family and their place in that family. And once that rewriting starts, it's very hard to undo. And now here's where the story takes a turn that actually gives me something real to hold on to. Because Ryan, as a teenager, his story is still being written. And quietly, almost underneath the radar, something has been shifting. Ryan has started talking about wanting to be behind the camera instead of in front of it, about editing, about directing, about animation, about creating his own content where he controls what the world sees rather than him being what the world sees. And I want to tell you why this is such a big deal from where I sit. And that's because his entire life, Ryan's sense of control has lived outside of himself. Other people decided what he wore. Other people decided what he opened. Other people decided how he reacted. Other people decided when filming started and when it stopped. And then the algorithm decided whether he was still relevant or not. The sponsors decided whether their content passed. 40 million strangers decided every single day whether he was enough to click on and to watch. And not once, not in any of those things, did the decision belong to Ryan. And now, quietly and perfectly, in the way that real healing usually works, he is trying to pick up the camera. And in psychology, there is something that we call sublimation. It is one of the most sophisticated things a human psyche can do. It is when a person takes the thing that was the source of their pain, the thing that was used against them, and they transform it into something that actually serves them. So Ryan is not walking away from the world of cameras and content. He is learning to own it. And that right there, that's not just a career choice. That is a healing strategy. That is a young person's mind doing something incredibly brave, which is taking the machine that ran his childhood and starting to figure out how to run it himself. And then there's also a legal piece here that matters. Illinois passed a law in 2024 that says if a parent is making money off a child appearing in a video content, then a portion of those earnings has to go into a protected savings account known as a trust, and that the child gets that trust when they turn 18. California passed a similar law, and other states are following that law. And former child creators, young adults who grew up on camera and came out the other side with empty bank accounts and fractured identities are walking into state legislators and testifying. They are telling their stories to people writing the laws, and they are refusing to call it what everyone called it while it was happening. They are not calling it family content anymore. They are calling it what it was, which is child labor. Ryan will have legal tools that children before him never had. he will have the right in some states to ask that his childhood be removed from the internet entirely, to take back his own face, his own voice, his own story, even if his parents do not agree with that. And that right there, that matters. That is real. But I do want to be honest with you. The legal piece is the smaller part of what I want you to take away from this video today. The bigger piece really is what comes next. And because of this, now I want to turn towards you. I want you to think about the first time someone needed you to be something other than what you actually were. Maybe it was not a camera. Maybe it was a lot quieter than that. Maybe it was a family where you learned early that certain feelings were not okay to have. Where being just sad or scared or angry or just tired made things harder for the people around you. Where the version of you that kept things calm was a version that got love. And maybe on the other hand, the version of you that told the truth about what you were actually feeling became the problem. So because of this, you learned. And you learned to show the version of yourself that the room needed you to be. You learned to just smile when you were not happy. You learned to say, I'm fine, when you were not fine. You learned to be easier, to be more agreeable, to be less complicated than what you actually were feeling inside. And here's what I want to ask you. How long have you been doing that? Not just as a child, but now, today. Are you still doing that? How much of what you actually show the world is actually you? And how much of it is actually the version of you that you built to survive an environment that did not have space for the real you? Because here's what I know about false selves. They become invisible, not all at once, but slowly over years. The more authentic the performance gets, the harder it is to feel the line between the performance and between who you actually are. And one day you realize that you cannot quite remember what you actually want in life, and not what will make someone else comfortable, not what will keep things smooth, not what will make you easier to deal with, but what you, the actual you, actually wants. Ryan is trying to start finding that out for himself. Slowly, quietly, he's picking up the camera on his own terms. He is starting to build something that belongs to him. He's beginning to grow into an identity that he gets to choose, not one that was handed to him before he could even tie his own shoes. So because of all of this, the question that I want to leave you with is this. What have you been carrying that was handed to you before you were old enough to actually get to choose? Maybe it was a role. What version of yourself did someone else need from you, and you have been holding onto it for so long that it started to actually feel like your own role, your own version? Because I want you to know that you are allowed to put it down, not all at once. It is not that simple, and I will not sit here and pretend like it is that simple. And not without some grief too, because there is always grief when you let go of the self that you built to survive something. That self that you built, it protected you for a reason, and it deserves to be honored before it is released. But you are allowed to start asking who is underneath it, because that person, the one who never got to just play, who never got to just be messy and unscripted and figuring it out in private, that person is still there. They are still waiting to come out. And that is not a wound that cannot be healed. And that right there is exactly where emotional wealth begins. So again, I'm Michelle McGowan, and this is Emotional Wealth. And if it landed somewhere real for you, then share it with somebody who needs the language for it, because maybe they went through it. Maybe share it with someone who grew up performing a version of themselves that was never really theirs. Give them the language. And also don't forget to like and subscribe if you have not yet, because we go this deep every single time in every video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next.